Today I'm going to be forging out a folding skillet. This is based on an example from the mid-1800s. This is another project that involves raising metal. However, with this project I'm going to be using a much thicker piece of metal, and that involves a totally different process. I'm going to be using 14 gauge sheet metal, so that means that I have to do all the upsetting while the metal is hot. This speeds up the process quite a bit because it's so much easier to move hot metal than cold, but it also means that you can get into a lot of trouble quickly as well. So you have to really be careful about how you're shaping the metal and making sure that you're not distorting the piece to a point where it's going to be really hard to bring it back into the proper shape. But even though the process is totally different, the principle is exactly the same. I'm going to start off by creating a fold in the metal and then systematically hammering out that fold so that that section of the metal becomes shorter. Once I have the fold well defined, I'm going to be hammering out the fold by working systematically from the base of the fold to the edge of the plate. I'm demonstrating here what I'm doing on a scrap piece of metal so it's easier for you to see, but the process is exactly the same. It's just hammering out these folds over and over again until you get the shape that you want. It's important to watch your heat and resist the urge to keep hammering even though the metal is starting to cool off. If you keep hammering on cold metal, you're just going to unbend the fold. You won't be upsetting it and making that material shorter. The frying pan itself is going to be made from a 10-inch piece of 14 gauge sheet metal. This is the bottom of the pan, and the scribe line that you see here is 6 inches in diameter, and it's the inside edge of the pan. So I'm going to be using that line as a reference when I create the folds on the edge of the pan. That extra piece of metal sticking out is what I'm going to need to make the hinge later on. I'm going to start by upsetting the metal on either side of the hinge area. I'll put 2 folds right here, and then I'll start working the pan from there. You have to be patient with this process at first. When you're starting from a flat plate, it doesn't automatically just start lifting up into a vessel. And the first few upsets that you do don't really seem to be doing anything. It's not really until you get all the way around the pan that you start seeing the shape develop. The first pass usually results in a very gradual slope to the sides, but before you move on to the second pass, you need to really define the base area. Make sure that that edge between the slope of the sides and the bottom is very well defined, because you're going to need that to create your second and third pass. If that isn't well defined, you're going to lose your place and the pan's going to start wandering around, and you're going to have a really hard time bringing it back into a concentric, even looking shape. If you get in too much of a hurry just trying to raise the sides up to the angle that you want, you could easily wind up with a pan that's lopsided or misshapen. So it's really important to create a good base and work from that base and always reference back to it. Once the shaping is done, you can start smoothing out all the hammer marks on the inside of the pan. Just take very light hammer blows and work systematically over the entire surface. Here I'm just using my 3.5 pound cross peen, and it has a very large smooth radius. And then I follow that up by working over the entire surface with a very light cross-peen hammer. Again, it needs to have a very nice smooth radius that doesn't leave any dents. Now at this point you can put whatever level of finish you want on this pan. The metal's thick enough that you can do whatever grinding or sanding you need to remove the remaining hammer marks. I'm not going to be using this pan, so I'm just going to leave the forged finish. The handle is just a wedge-shaped piece of 14 gauge sheet metal. It's roughly 9 inches long, it's 3¼ inches at its widest point, and it's roughly 1¼ inch at the other end. It really can be made any size that you like. The narrow end just needs to fit the hinge area that you're making on the pan, and the other end just gets hammered into a socket. This socket handle can be used as is, but you can also put a sharpened stick into the socket to extend your reach. If you're careful about how you hammer this thing, you can get a reasonably good socket without using any kind of a mandrel. It's just a matter of taking your time, making small changes, and not trying to do too much at once. So here's the frying pan fully assembled. I've bent the handle so it conforms to the inside of the pan, and I've cut it to length so that it fits neatly within the pan. To make the hinge, I just cut out 2 flaps out of the extra material that was left on the edge of the frying pan. And those flaps get bent up and drilled as you see here. The barrel of the hinge at the bottom of the handle is just form cold around a 1/4 inch round bar, and then that 1/4 inch round bar is used as the pin and just riveted in place. I bent the flaps on the frying pan first, and then I just cut the handle down to fit inside of that space. And that extra flap of metal above the hinge is what holds the handle in the proper position when it's unfolded.